Even before attaining its independence from Spain, Cuba had several constitutions either proposed or adopted by insurgents as governing documents for territory they controlled during their war against Spain. Cuba has had several constitutions since winning its independence. The current constitution was drafted in 1976 and has since been amended. Early models. Events in early 19th century Spain prompted a general concern with constitutions throughout Spain's overseas possessions. In 1808, both King Ferdinand VII and his predecessor and father, Charles IV, resigned their claims to the throne in favor of Napoleon Bonaparte, who in turn passed the crown to his brother Joseph. In the ensuing Peninsular War, the Spanish waged a war of independence against the French Empire. On 19 March 1812, the Cortes Generales in refuge in Cadiz adopted the Spanish Constitution of 1812, which established a constitutional monarchy and eliminated many basic institutions that privileged some groups over others. The Cortes included representatives from throughout the Spanish Empire, including Cuba. Several models of constitutional government were proposed for Cuba. José Agustín Caballero offered a charter for Cuban autonomy under Spanish rule in Diario de la Habana in 1810, elaborated as the project for an autonomous government in Cuba in 1811. The next year, Bayamo attorney Joaquín Infante, living in Caracas, wrote his constitutional project for the island of Cuba. He reconciled his liberal political principles with slavery in Cuba, noting that slavery existed in the United States alongside Republican government. Spanish authorities imprisoned him for his writings. In 1821, Félix Varela represented Cuba in the Cortes Generales of Spain during a short period when the Constitution of 1812 was revived. He joined in a petition to the Crown for the independence of Spain's Latin American colonies, supported by his project of instruction for the politically and economically autonomous government of the overseas provinces. Guaymaro Constitution. The Guaymaro Constitution was the governing document written by the idealistic and politically liberal faction in the insurgency that contested Spanish colonial rule in Cuba and imposed on Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, the conservative who claimed leadership of the independence movement. It was nominally in effect from 1869 to 1878 during the 10 Years' War against Spain. 1901 Constitution. Two ad hoc constitutions were adopted in the course of Cuba's fight for independence from Spain. 1895 to 1898. On 16 September 1895, delegates representing the rebel forces adopted a constitution in Jimagayu, the Constitution of the Republic of Cuba in arms, and set it to be reviewed in 2 years by a representative assembly. It described relations between civil and military authority. It named key officials and outlined the requirements of a peace treaty with Spain. In September 1897, the Assembly met in La Haya, adopted a new document on 30 October, and named a new president and vice president. The 1901 Constitution was Cuba's first as an independent state. It incorporated 8 principles set out in the Platt Amendment, without which U.S. troops would not have been withdrawn from Cuba, including the clause that the United States has the right to intervene in Cuba's affairs to protect its independence and guarantee the stability of its government. All but one of the Platt Amendment principles remained in force until a treaty between Cuba and the United States, negotiated as part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy toward Latin America, took effect on 9 June 1934, leaving U.S. only its right to a permanent lease to its Guantanamo naval station. 1940 Constitution. During the presidency of Federico Laredo Bru, a constitutional assembly was elected in November 1939 to write a new constitution. The assembly debated publicly for 6 months and adopted the constitution at the Capitol in Havana. It was signed by the delegates on 1 July 1940 and took effect on 10 October 1940. It provided for land reform, public education, universal health care, minimum wage and other progressive ideas, many of which were not implemented in practice. The Constitution abolished capital punishment and established as national policy restrictions on the size of land holdings and an end to common ownership of sugar plantations and sugar mills. But these principles were never translated into legislation. The Constitution ordained a presidency and a bicameral Congress, both with a 4-year tenure, with a ban on direct re-elections to the office of president, though non-consecutive re-election would be tolerated, similar to the current Constitution of Chile, with executive power shared with a new, separate office of Prime Minister of Cuba, to be nominated by the president. Fulgencio Batista suspended parts of this constitution after seizing power in 1952. It was completely suspended after the Cuban Revolution. 1976 Constitution. After 16 years of non-constitutional government from 1959 to 1975, the revolutionary government of Cuba sought to institutionalize the revolution by putting a new constitution to a popular vote. The Constitution of 1976 was adopted by referendum on 15 February 1976, in which it was approved by 99.02% of voters, in a 98% turnout. It took effect on 24 February 1976. This constitution called for a centralized control of the market and recommitted the state to providing its citizens with access to free education and health care. As in the 1940 Constitution, the state was further granted the power to regulate the activities of religious institutions and the private ownership of media was prohibited. Article 53 gave citizens freedom of speech, and Article 54 gave citizens the right to assemble. In the late 1980s, the Eastern Bloc collapsed and Cuba confronted the economic crisis of the special period. In 1992, a constitutional amendment removed certain limitations on foreign investment and granted foreign corporations a limited right to own property on the island if they established joint ventures with the government. Another amendment established that Cuba is a secular state rather than an atheist state, prompting an expansion of local participation in religious observance, increased social service work on the part of sectarian international charities, and public recognition of religious pluralism. In 2002, the Constitution was amended to stipulate that the socialistic system was permanent and irrevocable. See also Cuban law, constitutional law, constitutional economics, constitutionalism, Constitution of Cuba 2002 English language version, Constitutions of Cuba, original Spanish language text, Political Database of the Americas, Constitución de la República de Cuba, original Spanish language text of 2002, the portal Cuba, Republic of Cuba, 1940 Constitution, English translation, The Rule of Law in Cuba, includes links to the Cuban Penal Code and Cuban Constitution in Spanish and some English translations. Cuba Center for the Advancement of Human Rights at Florida State University.